Have you ever noticed how online listings for things in remote areas always seem just a little too perfect? The rent's too cheap, the furniture's too nice, the job pays too well. There's always a reason nobody local wants it. Tonight, I'm going to tell you about 3 people who learned that lesson the hard way in the most terrifying places imaginable. The isolated countryside, where help is miles away and screams disappear into empty fields. These aren't urban legends. These are real experiences from real people who thought they were getting a good deal. What they got instead was something far worse. My name is Silent Fear, and before we begin, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Are you in a city apartment, a suburban house, or maybe you're out in the countryside yourself, listening to this alone in the dark? I want to know. And if you enjoy what you hear tonight, hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who appreciate true horror. Now turn down your lights, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't look away until we're finished. Let's begin. The first story comes from a man named James. This happened to him 7 years ago, back when he was 25 and fresh out of college with a degree that wasn't opening any doors. He was working an entry-level marketing job in downtown Boston that paid barely enough to cover his cramped studio apartment in Allston, and he was drowning. Every month, more than half his paycheck disappeared into rent before he could even think about groceries or student loans. He'd lie awake at night in his tiny apartment, listening to his neighbors through paper-thin walls, doing math in his head, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. They never did. That's when James started looking at rental listings outside the city, way outside. Places in rural Massachusetts and New Hampshire where $400 a month could get you an actual house instead of a glorified closet with a hot plate. He was scrolling through a regional classifieds website one Tuesday evening in late September when he found it. A cottage in Ashford Hollow, a tiny unincorporated area in western Massachusetts he'd never heard of. 1 bedroom, fully furnished, all utilities included. The photos showed a quaint white house with a wraparound porch, surrounded by open fields and dense woods. It looked like something from a postcard. And the rent? $400 a month. James stared at the listing for a full minute, waiting for the catch to reveal itself. There had to be something wrong with it. Maybe it was a scam. Maybe the photos were fake. But his finger was already hovering over the phone number. The man who answered had a voice like gravel in a cement mixer, deep and rough. He said his name was Mr. Trafford, and yes, the listing was real, and yes, the cottage was still available. In fact, he had several people interested, so if James wanted to see it, he should come that same evening since he had other appointments lined up. James should have recognized the pressure tactic, should have questioned why such a perfect place was being rented so cheaply, or why Mr. Trafford needed to fill it so urgently. But desperation has a way of silencing your better judgment. The drive took 90 minutes west on Route 2, then onto progressively smaller roads. James watched the city lights fade in his rear-view mirror, replaced by darkness and the occasional lonely farmhouse. His GPS took him through the town of Orange, then onto County Road 47, then onto an unmarked gravel path that seemed to lead to nowhere. The further he drove into Ashford Hollow, the more isolated everything became. No streetlights, no other cars, just his headlights, cutting through the darkness, illuminating cornfields that stretched endlessly on both sides of the narrow road. When James finally arrived at the address, the cottage looked exactly like the pictures. Mr. Trafford was waiting on the porch, a thin man in his 60s wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. He had kind eyes and a warm smile, which put James at ease immediately. "Welcome to Ashford Hollow," Mr. Trafford said, shaking James's hand firmly. "Not many folks know about this area. We like it that way. Quiet, peaceful." He showed James around the property. The cottage was perfect. Hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot. A stone fireplace that looked original to the house. Updated kitchen with appliances that actually worked. Everything James could want. The only strange thing was that all the windows had thick curtains already installed. Heavy burgundy fabric that blocked out nearly all the light. "For privacy," Mr. Trafford explained when he caught James looking at them. "Out here in Ashford Hollow, you'd be surprised how many folks wander through the fields at night. Hunters mostly. You'll want to keep those closed after dark." They sat at the kitchen table and went over the lease agreement. Everything seemed standard except for one clause that caught James's attention. Tenant agrees to remain inside the residence between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. James read aloud. "What's this about?" Mr. Trafford shifted in his chair, his weathered face serious. "Just a safety precaution. Like I said, hunters sometimes come through at night on this property. We've had incidents before in Ashford Hollow. This protects both of us." It seemed bizarre, but $400 a month for this place was worth following a few strange rules. James signed the lease. 3 days later, James moved in. The first week was absolutely perfect. He loved the peace and quiet of Ashford Hollow, the sounds of crickets at night, the way the stars looked without any light pollution. He kept the curtains open during the day to let in the sunshine, and he followed Mr. Trafford's rule about staying inside at night. On the 8th night, something changed. James was washing dishes around 9:30 in the small kitchen when he heard it for the first time. A low whistle, almost like someone trying to get a dog's attention. It came from somewhere beyond the tree line on the eastern edge of the property. He froze, his hands in the soapy water, listening. The whistle came again, this time from the western side near the road. A different pitch, a different pattern. James quickly dried his hands and walked to the kitchen window, peering out into the growing darkness of the Ashford Hollow countryside. He couldn't see anyone, just fields and trees and shadows. But the whistles continued, coming from different directions now. North, toward the woods. South, toward the neighboring property. East again. He remembered Mr. Trafford's warning about hunters and quickly yanked the curtain closed. The whistles continued for another 10 minutes outside the cottage, then stopped as suddenly as they'd started. James told himself it was nothing, just hunters communicating like Mr. Trafford had said. Normal countryside stuff. The next night, sitting in the living room around 9 o'clock, the whistles started earlier. And there were more of them. James counted at least 5 distinct patterns, coming from different locations around the cottage. They sounded coordinated, deliberate, like a language he couldn't understand. He called Mr. Trafford the following morning from his office in Boston. "Oh, that's just the hunters," Mr. Trafford said, his tone casual and unconcerned. "They use whistles to keep track of each other in the dark around these parts. Been doing it for years in Ashford Hollow. Nothing to worry about, son. Just keep your curtains closed and stay inside like we agreed." But it didn't feel like hunting communication to James. It felt like something else entirely. Something organized. Something that was focused specifically on his cottage. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps the algorithm show this content to more people. By the end of the second week, James had started to recognize the patterns. Standing in the cottage living room every evening, he'd hear them begin at exactly 8:45. They'd continue until midnight, growing progressively closer to the cottage as the hours passed. By 11:30, standing frozen in his bedroom, they sounded like they were right outside the windows, just beyond the curtained glass. James stopped opening the curtains at all, even during the day. The darkness felt safer than the exposure. He'd sit on the worn couch in the dim interior, working on his laptop, trying to convince himself that everything was fine in Ashford Hollow. On the 16th night, James made a critical mistake. He was lying in the bedroom around 10:30, reading on his phone, when he suddenly remembered he'd left his car unlocked in the small gravel driveway. His work laptop was in the trunk, and the thought of someone stealing it sent a spike of panic through his chest. He couldn't afford to replace it. James knew the rules. Stay inside after 10. But it would only take 30 seconds to run out to the car, parked just 20 feet from the porch, lock it, and come back. The whistles had stopped 20 minutes ago, like they always did around 10. Everything was quiet outside in the Ashford Hollow darkness. He sat up in bed, arguing with himself. Finally, desperation won over caution. James slipped on his shoes and walked through the small living room to the front door. He unlocked it slowly, the click sounding impossibly loud in the silent cottage. He eased the door open. The porch light was on a motion sensor. It flickered to life as he stepped outside, illuminating the immediate area around the cottage in harsh white light. The rest of the Ashford Hollow property beyond was pure darkness. James's car was parked about 20 feet from the porch on the gravel pad. He could see it clearly in the light's reach. Everything looked normal, empty, safe. He stepped off the porch and walked quickly across the gravel. The stones crunched under his feet, each step sounding like a gunshot in the silence of the countryside. He reached the car, hit the lock button on his key fob, heard the satisfying beep and click of the locks engaging. Relief washed over him. See? Nothing to worry about. Just paranoia. That's when he noticed that all the night sounds had stopped. The crickets in the grass, the distant frogs in the drainage ditch by the road, even the wind through the trees. Everything had gone completely silent in Ashford Hollow, like the world was holding its breath. James turned to head back to the cottage. They were standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, at the edge where the gravel driveway met the overgrown field. 7 or 8 figures, maybe more. He couldn't see their faces in the darkness, just silhouettes. Completely still, completely silent. Arranged in a loose semicircle around his car like they'd been waiting in the Ashford Hollow darkness for him to come outside. James's blood turned to ice water in his veins. For one frozen second, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then his survival instinct kicked in and he ran. He sprinted for the cottage, his feet pounding against the gravel. Behind him, he heard no pursuit, no shouts, nothing. Just that terrible silence blanketing the countryside. James slammed through the front door, locked it, threw the deadbolt and immediately killed all the lights in the cottage. He stood in the darkness of the small living room, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat, listening. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he heard footsteps on the wooden porch outside, slow, measured, deliberate. Someone was walking back and forth out there, from one end of the porch to the other, back and forth, back and forth. The footsteps stopped at the front door. A new sound began. Scratching. Fingernails on wood. It started at the front door, right where James was standing frozen in the darkness. Long, slow drags, like someone running their fingernails down the wooden surface. The sound made his skin crawl. The scratching moved to the window beside the door in the living room, then to the next window in the bedroom. They were circling the cottage, testing every entry point, every window, every door, looking for a way inside. James retreated through the small living room to the narrow hallway, the most interior part of the cottage. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his phone clutched in his hand. His thumb hovered over the emergency call button. But what would he tell them? That people were outside his house in Ashford Hollow? He'd violated the lease by going outside after 10. What if Mr. Trafford pressed charges? What if this was somehow his fault? The scratching continued for hours around the perimeter of the cottage. Sometimes it would stop for a few minutes, and James would think it was over. Then it would start again, at a different window, a different door. Patient, persistent, relentless. Around 3 a.m, the scratching finally stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. James sat there in the dark hallway, straining to hear anything, but the cottage was completely quiet. He didn't sleep. He sat in that hallway until the sun came up, until golden light started seeping through the gaps in the curtains, until the countryside seemed normal again. The moment it was light enough, James went outside onto the porch. The wooden porch was covered in muddy footprints, dozens of them overlapping, going in every direction. Different sizes, different patterns. And on the window frames around the cottage, long scratch marks gouged into the wood, deep enough to leave splinters, dozens of parallel lines, like someone had dragged their fingers across the frames over and over and over. James pulled out his phone with shaking hands and called Mr. Trafford from the porch. "I'm breaking the lease," he said without preamble. "I need to leave Ashford Hollow today." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Did you go outside after 10? Mr. Trafford asked quietly. James's throat was dry. "Yes." Another pause. "That's unfortunate. They don't like that. Not here in Ashford Hollow." "Who?" James demanded. "Who are they? What is this?" "The previous tenants," Mr. Trafford said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't follow the rules either. They're part of the property now." "What does that mean? What happened to them?" But the line was already dead. Mr. Trafford had hung up. James packed everything he owned in less than 2 hours. He threw his belongings into his car without bothering to organize anything, without even checking if he'd left anything behind in the cottage. He just wanted out of Ashford Hollow. As he was loading the last box into his trunk in the gravel driveway, he heard it, the whistles, starting up even though it was only 11 in the morning, coming from the tree line, coming from the fields, coming from everywhere at once in the Ashford Hollow countryside. James got in his car and drove away without looking back. He made it about half a mile down the narrow gravel road before he risked a glance in his rearview mirror. People were emerging from the cornfields on both sides of the road, walking slowly, deliberately toward the cottage. Even in the bright sunlight, he couldn't make out their faces clearly. They moved wrong, too stiff, too synchronized, like puppets on strings. James pressed the accelerator to the floor and didn't slow down until he was back on Route 2, surrounded by other cars, heading east toward Boston and civilization. He never contacted Mr. Trafford again. He forfeited his security deposit, broke the lease, and never looked back. He still lives in Boston now, in an expensive apartment on the 12th floor of a high-rise building in Cambridge. But sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet, James swears he can hear whistling outside his window. Different patterns, getting closer. And he wonders if following the rules would have kept him safe forever, or if eventually they would have come for him anyway in that isolated cottage in Ashford Hollow. Some deals are too good to be true for a reason, and some prices are paid in ways that money can't measure. The second story was told to me by a woman named Hannah. This happened 4 years ago in late October, when she just bought her first house in Worcester, Massachusetts. It was a small place, a fixer-upper in a decent neighborhood that needed work, but it was hers. The problem was that the house came completely empty. No furniture, no appliances beyond what was built in, nothing. And Hannah was broke. The down payment had drained her savings, and furnishing an entire house was going to take time and money she didn't have. She started haunting online classifieds, looking for secondhand furniture. One Saturday morning, while scrolling through listings with her coffee at her kitchen table, she found something that seemed too good to be true. A complete bedroom set in Millbrook County, a rural area about 3 hours west. Bed frame, dresser, nightstand, and mirror. All solid wood, beautiful craftsmanship, clearly antique. The photos showed intricate carvings and a rich, dark cherry finish. The kind of furniture you'd find in an estate sale for thousands of dollars. The seller was only asking $200 for everything. Hannah read the listing 3 times, looking for the catch. The furniture was located deep in Millbrook County farm country. The seller's name was Charlotte, and she explained in the description that she was selling her late mother's belongings quickly because she was selling the family farm on Meadowbrook Road. Hannah sent a message through the website. Charlotte responded within 5 minutes, eager and friendly. They arranged for Hannah to drive out that same afternoon to the farm in Millbrook County. Charlotte provided detailed directions, warning Hannah that GPS wouldn't work well once she got close to the farm. The directions were specific. Take Route 9 west to Millbrook County. Turn left at Miller's Feed Store in the town of Hadley, right at the fork where the pavement ends onto Meadowbrook Road. Straight for 3 miles past the abandoned grain silos until you see a faded white mailbox. Hannah wrote everything down carefully. The drive started pleasant enough. Highway gave way to county roads, which gave way to gravel paths, winding through endless fields of corn and soybeans in Millbrook County. Hannah saw maybe 5 other cars the entire drive. Charlotte's farm on Meadowbrook Road was set way back from the main road. The driveway was at least half a mile long, bordered on both sides by overgrown fields where nothing had been planted in years. The house came into view slowly, like something emerging from fog. It was a large Victorian, 2 stories, probably beautiful once upon a time. Now it was dying in the Millbrook County countryside, The paint was peeling in long strips, exposing gray wood underneath. Several windows were boarded up with plywood. The porch sagged in the middle like a broken back. Charlotte was waiting outside on the deteriorating porch. She was thin, maybe late 50s, with gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She seemed nervous, constantly glancing back at the house, like she expected something to come out of it. "Thank you so much for coming all this way to Millbrook County," Charlotte said, shaking Hannah's hand quickly. Her palm was cold and damp. "The furniture's upstairs, second bedroom on the right. I'd appreciate if we could be quick about this. I'm trying to get everything cleared out of this place by tonight." Hannah thought it was an odd request, but didn't argue. Charlotte seemed stressed, and selling a family home in rural Millbrook County was emotional. Hannah grabbed her tools from her car and followed Charlotte inside. The farmhouse smelled wrong. Old wood and dust, yes, but underneath that was something else. Something sweet and rotten at the same time, like fruit that had gone bad months ago. All the furniture in the main rooms was covered with white sheets, giving everything a ghostly, abandoned appearance. The stairs creaked under their weight as they climbed. Each step groaned like it was in pain. At the landing, Charlotte stopped and pointed down the dark hallway without looking. "Second door on the right," she said, her voice tight. "I'll wait downstairs. Please be as quick as you can." Before Hannah could respond, Charlotte was gone, practically running back down the stairs, her footsteps echoing through the empty farmhouse. Hannah walked down the hallway slowly. The floorboards complained with each step. She counted the doors as she passed them in the dim light. First door on the right, second door on the right. She turned the handle and pushed it open. The bedroom was exactly as described in the listing. A gorgeous 4-poster bed made of dark cherry wood with intricate carvings of vines and flowers. A matching dresser with an attached mirror. A nightstand with delicate carved legs. The set was easily worth 10 times what Charlotte was asking. Hannah set down her tools on the dusty floor and approached the bed, running her hand over the smooth wood. That's when she noticed something odd. The inside of the bedposts, the parts you wouldn't normally see unless you were disassembling it, were covered in scratch marks. Deep gouges in the wood, clustered so thick they overlapped. They weren't decorative. They looked desperate, frantic, like someone had clawed at them for hours. Hannah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, examining the marks more closely in the dim bedroom. They definitely weren't part of the original craftsmanship. They were damage. Recent damage, based on the color of the exposed wood beneath the finish. A sound from the hallway made her look up. For just a second, less than a heartbeat, she could have sworn she saw someone standing in the doorway, a figure in white. But when she blinked and focused, there was nothing there in the empty hallway. Hannah shook her head. Old farmhouses in places like Millbrook County made weird shadows. That's all it was. She started disassembling the bed frame, which came apart easily. The pieces were heavy but manageable. She carried the first load down the creaking stairs and out to her car parked in the overgrown yard. Charlotte was pacing in the living room of the farmhouse, checking her watch every few seconds. "How much longer?" Charlotte asked without looking at Hannah. "Maybe 30 minutes total," Hannah said, setting the bedpost down. "The bed's coming apart easy." Charlotte nodded, wringing her hands nervously. "Please hurry, I want to be away from this place before dark." Hannah made several more trips, loading the bed frame, piece by piece into her SUV. On her fourth trip up the stairs, she noticed something that made her stop on the landing. The door to the room next to the bedroom was open now, hanging slightly ajar. She was absolutely certain it had been closed before. She remembered noticing all the closed doors in the hallway when she first came upstairs. Hannah knew she should just ignore it and finish loading the furniture from this Millbrook County farmhouse. But curiosity has a way of overwhelming common sense. She walked over and pushed the door open wider. The room was completely empty except for chains. Heavy chains bolted into the wall at waist height. 4 sets of them with metal cuffs at the ends. The cuffs were stained dark with something that might have been rust. The wall around the chains was covered in scratch marks, just like the bedposts. But these were deeper, more violent, and carved into the plaster over and over in different sizes and different levels of desperation were the words, "Help me." Hannah's stomach dropped. She backed away from the room on legs that suddenly felt unsteady. She bumped into someone behind her in the hallway. Charlotte was standing right there, close enough that Hannah could smell her breath. She hadn't heard her come up the stairs. "You weren't supposed to see that room," Charlotte said quietly, her voice flat. Hannah's mouth was dry. "What is this? What happened here in this house?" Charlotte's face was expressionless. "My mother was very sick toward the end. Dementia. She became violent here in the farmhouse. We had to restrain her for everyone's safety. It was the only way. This doesn't look like—" "You should finish loading your furniture," Charlotte interrupted. Something in her voice had changed, gone cold. "It's getting late. You have a long drive back through Millbrook County. You don't want to be on these roads after dark." Hannah didn't argue. She went back to the bedroom, grabbed the dresser, and started maneuvering it down the stairs. Her hands were shaking. She just wanted to get out of this farmhouse, out of Millbrook County as fast as possible. As she was carrying the dresser through the hallway, she glanced at the mirror attached to it. In the reflection, she saw a woman standing at the top of the stairs behind her. A woman in a white nightgown, thin as a skeleton with gray skin and sunken eyes. She was staring directly at Hannah. Hannah spun around. The hallway was empty. She practically ran down the stairs and out to her car in the overgrown yard. Charlotte followed her out onto the porch, watching silently as Hannah loaded the dresser. "Just the nightstand and mirror left," Hannah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll help you," Charlotte said suddenly. "It'll be faster. I want this done." They went back upstairs together into the farmhouse. As Hannah picked up the nightstand, she noticed a journal inside the drawer, old leather-bound, with yellowed pages. Without really thinking about why, Hannah grabbed it and shoved it into her jacket pocket. Charlotte didn't seem to notice. They carried the nightstand down together in tense silence through the dying farmhouse. Hannah went back alone for the mirror. The bedroom felt different now, colder, even though it was a warm October afternoon. The sunlight coming through the dusty window seemed dimmer than it should be. She carefully lifted the mirror off the wall, holding it by the ornate frame. As she turned toward the door, she saw her in the reflection again. The woman in the white nightgown, standing in the corner of the bedroom. Her skin was the color of old newspaper. Her eyes were dark holes. Her hands were extended toward Hannah, and her fingers were bent at wrong angles, like they'd been broken and healed incorrectly. Her mouth was open in a silent scream. Hannah didn't look at the corner directly. She kept her eyes on the door and walked out of that bedroom as fast as she could without running through the Millbrook County farmhouse. Charlotte was waiting by Hannah's car in the yard. Hannah loaded the mirror, handed over the cash, and got in her vehicle. Charlotte counted the money slowly, deliberately. "One more thing," Charlotte said, leaning close to Hannah's window. "Don't put that furniture in your bedroom. Put it in a guest room in your house, somewhere you don't sleep." "Why?" Hannah asked. Charlotte's eyes were hollow. "Just don't." She stepped back from the car. "You should leave Millbrook County now. It's getting dark." Hannah drove away fast down the long driveway, her hands tight on the steering wheel. She watched the farm on Meadowbrook Road shrink in her rearview mirror until it disappeared completely behind the overgrown fields. That night back in Worcester, Hannah unloaded all the furniture into her garage. She'd already decided she wasn't bringing it inside the house until she figured out what to do with it. While she was working under the garage light, she remembered the journal. She sat on her garage floor with a work light and read it cover to cover. The journal belonged to Charlotte's mother. Her name was Dorothy, and the entries started out normal. Daily farm life in Millbrook County, weather observations, what she'd cooked for dinner. Mundane and ordinary. But gradually, the entries changed. Dorothy started writing about hearing whispers in her bedroom at night in the farmhouse, about seeing shadows move across the walls when there was nothing to cast them, about feeling hands touching her while she slept, cold fingers trailing across her face. She begged her family to believe her. She wrote pages about trying to convince Charlotte that something was wrong with the house on Meadowbrook Road, with the bedroom with the furniture. But they thought she was losing her mind. The entries became more desperate. Dorothy wrote about being locked in her room, about being chained to the wall, about her daughter standing in the doorway of the farmhouse, watching her scream, doing nothing. "She says I'm sick," Dorothy wrote in shaking handwriting. "She says I'm imagining things. But I know what I saw in this house. I know what they did. The furniture remembers. Every person who slept in that bed, everyone who looked in that mirror. It remembers them all. It keeps them here in Millbrook County. And now it has me." The final entry was barely legible, written in what looked like frantic scratches. "She's keeping me here on the farm. Won't let me leave Meadowbrook Road. Says I know too much. Says I saw what they did to the others. The furniture knows. It remembers everyone who owned it before. Don't trust Charlotte. Don't trust the..." The sentence ended mid-word, like Dorothy had been interrupted. Hannah immediately listed the furniture online for free. She didn't want money for it. She just wanted it gone from her garage. Someone came and picked it up the very next day, a young couple from Springfield who were thrilled to get such beautiful antiques for nothing. Hannah tried to warn them. She really did. But they just smiled and thanked her and drove away with the furniture loaded in their truck. A week later, Hannah tried to find Charlotte's original listing. It was gone. She searched for Charlotte's name, the farm's address on Meadowbrook Road, anything. There was no record of any of it. She even drove back out to Millbrook County one Saturday, following the same direction Charlotte had given her. She drove through Hadley, turned at Miller's feed store, took the right fork onto Meadowbrook Road, drove straight for 3 miles past the abandoned grain silos, looking for the faded white mailbox. There was nothing there. No mailbox, no driveway, no farm. just an empty field with a historical marker that said the land had been vacant for over 40 years. Hannah still has Dorothy's journal locked in a drawer. She's thought about going to the police, but what would she tell them? That she bought furniture from a woman who might not exist in Millbrook County? That she has the diary of someone who might be a ghost? She doesn't know what happened on that farm on Meadowbrook Road. She doesn't know if Dorothy really was sick, or if something much darker was happening in that house. All she knows is that sometimes, late at night in her Worcester home, she sees a woman in white in her peripheral vision, and she wonders where that furniture is now, wonders who's sleeping in that bed, wonders if they've started hearing whispers yet. Some antiques carry more history than you want in your home, and some prices seem too good to be true because the real cost comes later in ways you never expected. Before we get to the final story, if you've made it this far, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. These stories take time to research and produce, and your support means everything. This last story comes from a man named Elias. It happened 5 years ago in Blackwater County, deep in rural Pennsylvania, and he still won't talk about it without his hands shaking. Elias was 23 at the time, living with his parents in Pittsburgh after dropping out of college. He'd completed 2 years of a business degree before realizing he hated everything about it and couldn't force himself to continue. Now he was stuck, working random jobs, trying to figure out what to do with his life while his parents alternated between disappointment and concern. Money was tight. Elias was trying to save enough to move out, but every job he found paid minimum wage and offered maybe 20 hours a week. He was getting desperate. He found the listing on an agricultural job board website one Wednesday evening in August. A farm in Blackwater County needed a temporary worker for 3 weeks of harvest season. The job offered room and board, plus $500 a week, cash. No experience necessary. Must be able to start immediately. $500 a week was more than Elias had ever made at any job. He called the number before. He could talk himself out of it. An older man answered on the second ring. His voice was rough but friendly. He said his name was Mr. Lev. And yes, the job was still available at his farm on Blackwater Road. His regular farmhand had quit without notice, and he desperately needed help with the late summer harvest in Blackwater County. The job was simple. General farm labor from dawn to dusk. Elias would stay in a cabin on the property and eat meals with the family. 3 weeks, then Elias could go home to Pittsburgh with $1,500 in his pocket. It sounded perfect. Too perfect. But Elias had stopped questioning good fortune. He agreed to drive out the next day for an interview at the farm in Blackwater County. Mr. Lev gave detailed directions, emphasizing multiple times that Elias shouldn't arrive after sunset. Property's not well lit out here on Blackwater Road, he explained. Real easy to get lost in the dark in these parts. Come during daylight hours, you'll find it no problem. Elias arrived around 3 in the afternoon the next day. The drive from Pittsburgh to Blackwater County took about 2.5 hours southeast through increasingly rural areas. The farm on Blackwater Road was massive, bigger than he'd expected. Hundreds of acres of corn and soybeans stretching to the horizon. A huge red barn that looked like it had been there for 100 years. Several outbuildings scattered across the property, and a white farmhouse that could have been featured in a magazine about traditional American architecture. Mr. Lev was waiting in the gravel driveway of the farmhouse. He was a big man, tall and heavy-set, probably in his mid-60s. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of someone who'd worked the Blackwater County soil his entire life. His face was weathered and lined, but his smile seemed genuine. His wife Jennifer came out to greet Elias as well. She was a small, quiet woman who smiled a lot but barely spoke. She nodded at everything Mr. Lev said and disappeared back into the farmhouse after a few minutes. Mr. Lev gave Elias a tour of the property, explaining the work that would need to be done. Harvesting, equipment maintenance, fence repairs, general upkeep around the farm. Nothing Elias couldn't handle with instruction. As they walked past the massive barn on Blackwater Road, Elias noticed something strange. All the animals went silent. The chickens in the coop stopped clucking. The cows in the distant pasture stopped moving. Even a dog that had been barking near one of the outbuildings went quiet. And they were all staring at the barn with the same fixed, unnatural stillness. "What's in the barn?" Elias asked, stopping on the dirt path. Mr. Lev's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Equipment storage. Old machinery from decades of farming. You won't need to go in there. That's my responsibility." He walked Elias to a small cabin about 100 yards from the main farmhouse, across a field. It was simple but comfortable. One room with a bed, a small bathroom, and a kitchenette. Everything Elias would need during his 3 weeks in Blackwater County. "Dinner's at 6 at the main house," Mr. Lev said, standing in the doorway of the cabin. "Now there's 3 rules you need to follow while you're here on my property, and I need you to take them seriously. First, you work only during daylight hours. When the sun sets over Blackwater County, you come back to this cabin and you stay here until sunrise. No exceptions. Second, you never go in that barn, not for any reason. I handle that building personally. Third, if you hear anything unusual at night out here, you ignore it completely. Don't investigate. Don't look outside. Don't even acknowledge it. Understand?" Elias thought the rules were weird, but not deal-breaking. He'd worked for bosses with stranger quirks. For $500 a week, he could follow a few odd rules on this isolated Blackwater County farm. "I understand," Elias said. "Good." Mr. Lev's face relaxed into a smile. "Then welcome aboard. Get yourself settled and come up to the farmhouse at 6. The first day of work went smoothly on the farm. Elias helped with the harvest, learning how to operate the machinery, how to check the crops, how to spot problems in the Blackwater County soil. Mr. Lev was a patient teacher, and the work was tiring but satisfying in a way Elias's previous jobs had never been. Dinner that night was wonderful in the farmhouse. Jennifer was an incredible cook, and Mr. Lev told stories about the farm's history. It had been in his family for 4 generations, passed down from father to son. He and Jennifer had no children, so he didn't know what would happen to the Blackwater County property when he was gone. Elias noticed they never mentioned why the previous farmhand had quit. He didn't ask. That first night, Elias returned to his cabin around 7:30, exhausted from the physical labor. He fell asleep almost immediately in the small bed. He woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of footsteps outside his cabin. Heavy boots on gravel walking slowly around the perimeter of the building. Around and around, circling the cabin over and over in the Blackwater County darkness. Elias remembered the 3rd rule. Don't investigate. Don't acknowledge it. He stayed in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the footsteps circle his cabin for 20 minutes before they finally stopped. At breakfast in the farmhouse the next morning, Elias mentioned it to Mr. Lev. "Just deer," Mr. Lev said without looking up from his eggs. "They sound heavier than you'd think at night out here. Sound plays tricks on you in Blackwater County." But Elias had grown up hunting with his father in the Pennsylvania woods. He knew what deer sounded like. Those weren't deer. Those were human footsteps on the gravel. He was sure of it. He didn't argue with Mr. Lev. The second night in the cabin, the footsteps returned. But this time they were accompanied by dragging sounds. Something heavy being pulled across the ground between the barn and the farmhouse. The dragging went from the direction of the barn to the farmhouse, then back to the barn, over and over across the Blackwater County property. Elias lay in his bed, covers pulled up to his chin, trying to convince himself it was nothing. On the fourth day, Elias was working on a section of fence near the barn when he dropped his hammer. It bounced once on the hard ground and rolled under the barn door. Elias looked around. Mr. Lev was in the far field, at least a quarter-mile away across the Blackwater County farm. Elias could just open the door, grab his hammer, and close it again. What harm could that possibly do? He grabbed the barn door handle and pulled. The interior was dark, but as Elias's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw them. Cages. Dozens of metal cages stacked on top of each other, filling the entire barn. And inside the cages were people. At least they used to be people. They were emaciated, filthy, their skin hanging loose on their bones. Some were rocking back and forth in their cages. Some were completely still. All of them had the same dead, empty expression. Elias stumbled backward from the barn, his heart slamming in his chest. One of the people in a cage near the door, a young man about Elias's age, looked up. Their eyes met. "Run," the young man whispered. His voice was like dried leaves. "Before dinner. Before you end up here too on this farm." Elias heard footsteps behind him on the Blackwater County dirt. He spun around. Mr. Lev was standing there on the farm path 10 feet away holding a shotgun. His expression was calm, almost sad. "I told you not to go in the barn," he said quietly. Elias ran. He didn't think, didn't plan. Just turned and sprinted toward where he'd parked his truck near the cabin. Behind him he heard Mr. Lev shout something. Then a gunshot echoed across the farm. The bullet hit the ground 2 feet to Elias's left, kicking up Blackwater County dirt. He dove behind a tractor, his lungs burning. Another shot. The bullet pinged off metal somewhere close. "Elias!" Mr. Lev's voice was eerily calm across the farm. "Be reasonable. You're only making this harder on yourself." Elias's truck was 30 feet away across the open yard. Too far, he'd be completely exposed. But there was a cornfield to his right, the stalks tall and thick. He could hide there in the Blackwater County crops. He bolted for the corn, running as fast as his legs would carry him. Behind him, more gunshots. He zigzagged through the field, ducking and weaving, expecting to feel a bullet tear through him at any second. He crashed into the cornfield and kept running through the Blackwater County crops. The stalks were packed tight, slapping his face, catching at his clothes. He had no idea which direction he was going. He just ran. After what felt like an eternity, he broke through the other side of the field and found himself on a rural highway. He could barely breathe. His legs were shaking, but he was alive and away from the Blackwater County farm. He flagged down the first car that came by, a sedan driven by an elderly woman. She took one look at his face and pulled over. The police came. Elias told them everything about the farm on Blackwater Road. They drove to the property in Blackwater County. It was abandoned. No Mr. Lev, no Jennifer. The barn was empty, no cages, no people. According to property records, the farm had been sold to a development corporation 3 months earlier. No one named Lev had owned the Blackwater Road property in over 20 years. The police thought Elias had hallucinated or lied. They found no evidence of anything he'd described on the Blackwater County farm. But Elias knows what he saw. Later, he found the job listing in his emails saved folder. The phone number he'd called went to a disconnected line. The email address bounced back as non-existent. Sometimes Elias wonders if those people in the cages were the previous farmhands. All the desperate people who'd answered similar listings over the years for work in Blackwater County. He wonders what Mr. Lev wanted with them, what he was doing to them. And he wonders if somewhere right now, on another remote farm, in another rural county, under another name, Mr. Lev is posting another job, listing on Blackwater Road, waiting for the next desperate person to call. Elias moved back to the city after that. He refuses to drive through rural Pennsylvania, won't even look at job listings anymore. Some opportunities, he learned, cost more than you can imagine. And some harvests in places like Blackwater County aren't agricultural at all. Thank you for watching Silent Fear. If these stories from Ashford Hollow, Millbrook County, and Blackwater County unsettled you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share your own experiences with rural horror in the comments below. And remember, when something seems too good to be true in the countryside, it usually is, especially in remote places where nobody can hear you scream. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.